which I've sent via email, but today we are organizing these two workshops primarily because we are in a phase of development that's really important for Singa. We are striving for systemic change. And what does that mean? It means that today there's a reality called migration, and this reality requires us to look at a whole system, and from what we've seen in the past, responding to one part of the problem doesn't create the impact that we would like to see. And so so as you guys already know, we've been talking a lot about launching eventually an investment fund, but I think a lot of times the question that comes up is, why an investment fund? What is the role of finance in all this? And how is it related to systemic change? So what we want to do via these two workshops is to provide you with some notions to help you understand why we're focused on this today, and to help you understand how this is part of also a bigger ecosystem. And during the second workshop, I mean, you'll have a more intimate moment with Guillaume, our founder, to ask questions of what this means concretely. But before we get to that workshop, the workshop today is dedicated to giving you guys some just preliminary notions of what finance is, what impact is, how are the two related. And today we have a very, very, very special person here with us that has taken her time to give you kind of this crash course on finance and impact. Yeah, crash course. Guillaume would like to speak as well, and I'll let Guillaume also introduce our speaker. All right, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this series of workshops on finance and impact. I'm actually excited. We are going to raise awareness about these topics inside the network. You can't see, but in the room, we have 8 people. So it's not just the people online. We are like a lot of people interested in this topic. 15 people on the Singa network. It's big. Stephanie was asking, is it like, does it mean that actually people are interested? And I feel like with the situation in Ukraine, with what's going on for each of us, if we're 15, that's actually a big number. So I wanted to tell you a little story about our brand and how it started. Because when we launched Singa in 2011, actually, the official story is 2012, but the truth is that we started to work in 2011. We looked for different names. And so we've done a benchmark, and we've tried to Google translate a lot of words. And the benchmark, we found one organization that we wanted to kind of look alike. It was called Kiva. So it was a simple word, pretty easy to share. We liked the fact that it finished by A. And it was an organization that was doing microfinance all over the world. If you've never seen it, I invite you guys to have a look at it, because this was clearly one of the main inspiration for Nathanael and I when we started this organization. Because also the big topic for us was, how do we finance refugee entrepreneurs? So it was the DNA also of this organization, was how to find financial solutions for people that are excluded today from the financial world. And all the words we put on Google were actually words related to finance. We put finance, we put loans, we put any words we could find in relation with this. And there was one word who struck us. It was the translation of loan in Bambara, which is Singa. And that's how we found the world. Then we realized like 2 or 3 years later that it also meant wire in Lingala, and so we told that different story because we started other programs. But the truth is that the story of Singa is actually related to finance at the really beginning. And so 10 years later, financing migrant funders and innovations in the field of migration is still one of our top preoccupation. And we need to understand more which are the players, what is at stake today in the world of finance, what are the rules in that world, what can we change. And we have one of the best ambassadors today to tell us about finance as it stands, but also finance, the way you can actually change finance, or maybe try to.
That's the goal.
And inspire like big companies to make a move. So Stephanie, the stage is yours.
You don't know the expression, the oversell, underdeliver, undersell, overdeliver. Now I got like a huge. How do you share the screen? Partager l'écran. Donc, alors, donc le document partagé, c'est là. All right. Okay. So can everybody hear me, because I can't see your face today? I'm going to try to squeeze in an hour and a half what I'm teaching students at the American Business School and at Sciences Po in a semester. Okay. All right, which is really how to make the financial work for the economy, society, and the planet. And I've got an alternative title now, which is how can finance contribute to a just transition? Because it basically means the same thing, except that now people are familiar with the term just transition, which is how do you take care of people within climate change policies. So why this presentation? Well, this presentation, or why this course, why they start teaching this class, is because since the financial crisis of 2008, finance has been really perceived as a bad influence, and definitely not contributing to make the world a better place. And what we see with the current crisis, whether it's COVID, climate, refugee, it has put the spotlight on the dysfunction of the system, and also on the emergency of how we need to change that system. So really, this is a course or a presentation for you to understand what the financial system is, how it works, so that we can transform it. But it's also for you to take ownership of finance, because at the end of the day, finance is a tool. And we need to take ownership of this tool so that we can contribute to just transition. Because Fatme asked me to do a presentation on sustainable finance. Sustainable finance is finance, whether we call it impact finance, sustainable finance, green finance, it's finance, just like social business is business. So this is what it is. First, so who I am. I chose 4 quotes from my LinkedIn profile that I think describe what I believe in. The first one is that if climate was a bug, we would have saved it a long time ago. The second is that data rarely moves people, but great art does, because I like art. The third is one by Kofi Annan when he was president of the UN, is that there is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women. So I really believe in female qualities and promoting those qualities in men and women. And the last one is one by Mandela, which is action without vision is passing time. Vision without action is daydreaming, but vision with action can change the world. And really, action is the only path to change. So who am I? Well, I've been almost 50 years on this planet, half in finance. I'm an entrepreneur, financial advisor, investor, but also teacher, mentor, coach, art collector, film producer, dancer, mother. And since January 2021, I've been leading the financing arm of the coalition Business for Inclusive Growth, which is a coalition of multinationals partner with the OECD to transform businesses. So how are we going to do this? It's really 2 parts in this presentation. The first part is to understand how finance works and how we got into this mess, basically. And the second part is how can we get there to address transition with the impact revolution. So we look at investment process, mechanisms, and impact measurement. So I'm going to skip that one because we have a lot of time. Although no, I like that one. What is this? It's Uxmal. It's the pyramid in Yucatan, the Maya. And on the right, it's the Canary Wharf in London. And I took this from a book by Nick Silver, who's an actuary English one. And the Maya civilization disappeared in the about 9th century. It was quite advanced. They had mathematicians, agriculture, everything. So when the Spanish arrived in the 18th century, they saw ruins and the civilization never got back. So how did it, why did it disappear? Scientists think that it's a mixture of exhaustion of resources, also warfares, and probably climate change, the climate event. Sounds familiar? Mm-hmm. Exhaustion of resources, warfare, and climate events. So we can look at Canary Wharf, which really groups all the banks in the world, basically, and think about in several centuries what it's going to look like and what people are going to think, what was going to happen there. Anyway, so that's why we start with that. Collateral damages. If we think about sustainability, I'm not going, you know, the human impact on the environment. Climate change is not new, but the speed of it is quite unprecedented. In 50 years, we destroy 60% of the land vertebrates, more on the ocean. It took 100,000 years for the dinosaurs to disappear when the comet hit. So really, it's quite a big change. I like that guy David Attenborough. He does nature films on BBC. He's about 95 years old. Our Life on This Planet. He did that in 2020, and he talks about how many people there were when he was born on the Earth. There were 2.7 billion people, and by the time he dies, we're on our way to 8 billion. And so we really see there is a clear correlation between humans and the environment. The second, the outbreak of populism. So why is Trump still there? Because even though he's not president anymore, Trumpism is actually quite alive, even more. And divisions are still there. I'm not going to comment the other ones, Brexit, Putin. This is another collateral damage is poverty and inequality. So even though poverty has been decreasing over the centuries and histories, with slightly going back up with the COVID crisis, poverty has decreased, but inequality has exploded in the past 60 years. And you see that the top 1% has, the picture speaks for itself. And this is for the world, by the way. If you look at America, it's even worse because the bottom 40% or 20% in America, their wealth has gone down in the past 40 years. So it's the picture is even more blatant. And mountains of debt. And if you look at debt, public debt, also that's worldwide debt, over 100%. And this is higher than the level of debt we had in after World War II, just as a comparison. So we do have a lot of things going on. And so the question we're asking today is to which extent finance is related to these pathologies, those collateral damages, ecological, political, social. So that's what we're going to try to understand. But to understand this, the way is really to understand what finance is about. And finance, if we can summarize what it is, it's like a control center of the economy. It's a social technology, it's a social tool that allocates the economic surplus back into the economy. So really the financial system sits at the top of the economy, which itself is embedded in human society, which itself is in the natural world. So really it's like this pyramid. And why finance is so important to understand and take ownership is that because finance decides where capital is allocated. So if you decide to put financial resources in education, health, you will end up with an educated and population who is healthy. But if instead you put money into fossil fuels, cigarettes, tobacco and all, well, you know what population you're going to end up with. So this is it. The role of finance for individuals, well, it allows us to use it as a payment system. I mean, it's quite convenient finance. You can pay anything anywhere in the world. I'm talking for people like us, not necessarily for a farmer in a developing country away from rural areas, but away from urban. It allows us to manage our risk instead of having all the money under our mattress, which can disappear if your house burns. Well, at least it's somewhere relatively safe. It allows us to smooth our lifetime consumption, so you can save while you're working so that you can spend later. Is the money well saved? That's another story. But really where the role of finance breaks down, it's about how it uses our savings to much useful investment. It actually does not do that. So all the money we're saving for further retirement, that it sits in the bank, it doesn't sit. It should be, you would like to this money to be used to lend for the productive economy, but actually it does really not do that. And really where finance is breaking down is how it chooses to allocate capital. So it has been really problematic. If you are trying to borrow to buy a house, that's relatively easy. Buy a car is relatively easy. If you want to borrow to set up a company, good luck. So banks do not lend to the productive economy. Banks lend for consumption, mostly. So if there's so little capital going to the productive economy, we can't really expect the economy to grow in a sustainable way. So let's look at how the economy has been over the past 50 years, more and more financialized. There has been many reasons, and one really great description of this whole process is a documentary by Charles Ferguson, Inside Job. So the financialization of the economy, there are really two big channels through which money flows. You have the deposit channel, which is a retail banking, which is the bank where you have your current account. This is the deposit channel. And you have the savings channel, which is the capital markets. So the deposit channel, this is the UK market in 2017, but it's really the same image everywhere you look at. And what we see is that over 60% of the loans are actually going to the financial sector itself. They lend to themselves. Banks lend to banks, they lend to insurers, and they just lend to themselves. And the second big chunk is real estate. So less than 20% goes to the real productive economy, entrepreneurs trying to make something real. The savings channel is mostly bonds and equity, debt and equity. The red part is the US. The US is really nearly half of the world bond and equity market. So the equity market, that's hard to see, but what you see here is that this is new issuance, new equity. It's less than 0.5%. New issue of equity, company shares. So all the rest is buybacks, mergers, and if you look at the blue line, the net issuance is actually negative in the US. In the UK, I think it's less than 0.5% of the total market cap. That means that all the volumes, the market capitalization, is just trading.
Company?
Sorry, it's public. It's equity. Yeah, public equity, listed company. So where it goes, it's really, it doesn't go to new issuance. It's very little. In the UK, London stock market, the same thing. It's about 4 trillion, the market cap of the London market, but the new issuance is less than 25 billion. So it's less than 0.5%. So so that's the equity market. The bond market, it's about 9% that is issued to non-financial companies of the bond market. So it's a very similar story. So in total, if we look at the savings channel, less than 4% goes to the real economy. So it's not really, and the rest is staying in as virtual assets being traded. Just a word on money creation. How is money created? because this is a good question we have to ask ourselves, especially now that we're printing money. So if you look at textbooks, money is created by the central bank. The central bank puts 100 in the banking sector, and then you have a reserve ratio, 10%, that you have to keep. So you have something called the multiplier effect. The central bank puts 100 in the banking system. The banks lend 90, keep 10, reserve ratio. That 90 goes in another bank, which keeps 9. So there's 81 that goes back, etc., etc. So with 100, you have about 1,000 euro dollar that is being created. That's the economic theory. In reality, it's not what's happening. In reality, what's happening is that it's the banks creating money through the lending process. Why? Because when the bank has some reserve, they lend money to an individual who opens an account, and that loan becomes an asset in the bank's books. Do you understand that? I mean, I could spend hours speaking about that, but there is no, so of course the bank needs to have some reserve for that loan, but there is no limit to how much a bank can lend. And banks, when their reserves are going low, they just borrow from each other through a market, which is a very short-term market called the repo market. It's part of a bigger market called the shadow banking market. And shadow banking is all those financial institutions lending to each other on a very, very short term, 1 day, 2 days, just to make up their reserve back up. And they do that nonstop. And it's actually a bigger volumes than what we see going on in terms of trading. So banks are really creating money. Banks are creators and suppliers of money via the lending process. So banks decide where the money goes, which part of the economy they are promoting. And they love real estate because real estate, they're actually the biggest owners of real estate are insurance banks. And they're really financing consumption mostly. And our savings, as you saw in the, and the other is not going to the real economy either. It stays as what we call untapped virtual capital. So capital is continually exchanged, buy and sell shares, and from which the financial sector extracts rent. Because each time you exchange, you pay commissions, even if it's very low. And if you are hiring an asset manager for your retirement, they do the same thing. And I was just looking at my not my mother-in-law, but I did call it my mother-in-law. She has her HSBC is her bank, and she's 70-something, 5, and HSBC made her invest in life insurance. So a big part in the Failloux, which has like nothing, no return, and a third is all in emerging markets. And they made her sign an arbitrage contract. So every 3 months they change. And the funds they invested in is all the India, China, Russia equity, I mean, all equity, a bit of US, a bit of Europe. And every 3 months they change. And I looked at what funds they change for, same thing. So one month it will be Japan equity something, and then the next term is going to be Japan index equity, or the U, and they do that all the time. And each time they change, they take 1% of fee.
What do they change? Oh, you just said it.
1% of fee, and they do that every 3 months for nothing, for absolutely nothing. So I'm like, oh my God, we're going to get rid of that. But this is typical of what banks, insurers do. They extract a rent from our savings. And if we look at financial transactions, they have exploded. And the derivative market is 10 times global GDP. So you wonder, like, why? Why is that?
They extract the rent from our savings that they invest in other assets.
Virtual ones.
Virtual ones.
And they keep on changing. It doesn't go in the economy.
And so so that's is that when we discuss today, like the reforms that we could bring to engage making savers or people who save money more engaged in the financial system, is that a part of the discussion where people can choose where banks invest the money?
Yes, but in an ideal world, people could choose, but you can only choose if you know what it is about. You know, when you don't know finance and the bank advisor says, okay, we're going to invest in that. This is not too risky. This is and we're going to do a portfolio, and the profile is intermediary. What do you do? So what happened? The relative size of the financial sector, I mean, a picture is 4,000 words. Just, let me see. Well, the financial sector in terms of revenues went from less than 3% of GDP, that's America, to almost 8%. But in terms of profits, this is just before the financial crisis 2008. The financial sector profit was 60% of the GDP of the whole profits of the US, and then it went down to very little financial crisis. But now it's back to nearly 40%, and I think now it's even higher. So it's a large part of the economy, and it doesn't necessarily translate into economic growth itself.
But it went down. Just there.
Sorry?
It went up and then down. What was it?
This is 2008.
No, after 2008.
This is the debt crisis.
Okay, that's yeah.
But
Okay.
that's the debt crisis. In terms of assets, it's even the financial assets are 620%, 6 times the size of GDP. So when we talk, we keep on saying banks are too big to fail, well, they're even bigger now. So it has shot up again. Well, it didn't move at all during the 50s, 70s, and when regulation started, especially in the 90s with Clinton, how do you say, canceled the Banking Act that Roosevelt put to stabilize the financial sector in 1933 after the Great Depression. And little by little, governments got rid of it, and then the final act was Clinton. So it didn't matter whether it was Republican or Democrat.
What is the Banking Act?
The Banking Act was separating the activities of financial institutions so that if you were a bank, you couldn't be an insurer. If you were a retail bank, you were not a mortgage bank. To keep them small so that they would not be too powerful. And when you had the merger of Citibank and Travelers, Citibank Bank, Travelers Insurers, that happened before they repealed the Banking Act, but that was the end of it because they managed to find ways that they could approve the merger of Citibank and Travelers into the Citigroup. And then the Banking Act was gone. So another way to look at the relative size of the financial sector is through compensation. So on average, CEOs earn 350 times more than the typical worker in their company. You can get those information online. I can't remember which site, but in some companies it's thousands times. Abercrombie and Fitch 6,000 times. But that's not a financial company, but they're number one. I don't know how much their CEO earns, but on average it's 350 times. And I remember that in some social businesses, one thing they are looking at is that discrepancy between the CEO salary and the employee salary. And for instance, a company social business like, that soap in America, Dr. Bronner.
Which one?
Dr. Bronner.
Oh, Dr. Bronner. Yeah.
Dr. Bronner's magic soap. I was at school with the CEO now, David Bronner. And one thing about Dr. Bronner, which is social business successful one, since you all know Dr. Bronner, the gap between the highest salary and the lowest, I think it's capped at 10, but it's they say it's no more than 10. That's so how finance uses capital to generate revenue for itself. So that's a lesson from the financial crisis. Again, the best way to look at it is inside job. Charles Ferguson. They use leverage. They managed to change. Do you understand leverage? Leverage, it's the debt to equity ratio. So if you have a fonds propre, your equity, how much you can lend, or borrow to lend, to invest. The debt to equity ratio was 33. Banks had, in the US, banks had lobbied the government so that the government would increase the debt ratio. When Lehman went bankrupt in 2008, their leverage ratio was 600.
Wow.
They had 1 billion of equity, 600 billion of assets. And if you look at what happened before the crisis, the 3 or 4 years that before, no, 3 years before.
At some point, how finance can be good.
Lehman kept on buying mortgage banks.
Yeah,
Lehman was one of the biggest actors in the in the real estate securitized market, what we call MBS, mortgage-backed securities, CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. So this is the second point, abstract and innovation, financial innovation. What do? Is that they take a real tangible asset and they securitize it. So they make virtual assets out of something real. And the real estate market is a good example. What happened, what set off the crisis was the real estate bubble. Because in America, they kept on giving money away with a variable interest rate to people who could not afford houses, to just buy houses, because the brokers would get paid. So they were happy to give loans to everybody to buy. So there was this bubble that set up. And when interest rates started to rise, then people could not pay anymore. But that's relatively simple to understand. But what happened is that the banks who were lending money to the people who could not afford, they didn't want to keep those in their balance sheet. They would put them in, they would package them, then they would cut them up, and they would resell that to other banks and to other asset managers that would invest in that. They would invest our savings, or to central banks, like the Greek central bank, by the way. And that's what's called collateralized debt obligations. So they securitize the real estate market. And plus they would also take insurance, what we call credit default swap, to insure their portfolio. So they knew that their portfolio had a chance of defaulting, but they would still gain because they were insured. It was a real mess. But that's an example of innovation or abstraction of the financial market. The third element is called colonization, and colonization is how finance is really infiltrating every part of the economy and society, infiltrating corporate governments. And you have corporates who are acting like banks almost, and governments, because you have, I can't remember the number of lobbyists in America. You have like 3,000 lobbyists just for finance. So that's like 5 lobbyists per congressman. No wonder they can't reform Wall Street. So it's Wall Street government. And the fourth point is maybe explains, I mean, the rest is the hegemony of thinking. And it's how finance has really taken over the intellectual and cultural hegemony, what I call the finance, the shareholder value finance, the efficient market, free market. This is really from Milton Friedman, which states that markets are efficient. That means that all the information is known, which means that the price of a company on the stock market is its real value. So when you have something that says that, what do CEOs do, especially when they have to publish their account every quarter? They try to push the price up as much as they can. Plus they're remunerated with the share price. And the way you push the price up is by increasing your profit, reducing your costs. So salaries don't increase. You don't invest in equipment that is where the revenues will be, or the profit will be long-term, like green equipment. So you postpone all those things that you know you need to do. It's a bit like politics, when you're only president for 5 years and you only have an electoral date. So you push the reforms. So CEOs is similar thinking, because they are focusing on the short term and they have to publish their accounts every term. They can't take those long-term decisions, even though they know that the long-term decisions would be good for the company. So really, finance has corrupted the study of the economics itself, because all these guys, this is what you learn in all the business schools, whether it's HEC here or Harvard Business School. It's what is being taught in those business schools. It's still derived from these economists, called the Chicago School. So it's starting to change, but it's still quite ingrained in the teaching of economics. I never understood economics. It was one of my worst subjects. So collateral damages summarized is that, you read Thomas Piketty, you know, the rich, they have assets and you can borrow money, so you can leverage on your assets. The price of the asset keep on going up. This is what happened with the past few years. So the rich become richer, the poor can't borrow. So the gap is increasing, inequality. With the rise of inequality, you have the rise of populism. With the governments being so indebted, when they are shocked, they don't actually have the. Well, France is not the best example because in France the government is still trying to put mattresses on poverty, but in other countries, when you have shocks, the government has no mattress to alleviate. So poverty becomes a real issue, and to repay the debt, you need constantly to run un peu la course en avant. You need to stimulate. You have all those stimulus packages, the plans de relance, and blah blah. So what it stimulates, it creates more debt, more consumer spending for things that we don't need, that don't make us happy anyways, and that more environmental damage. So this is really, I think this is a good photo that you know what that is?
In Australia, no?
Huh?
Is it not in Australia?
No, this is the sixth continent.
No, that's not in Australia. That's in Cambodia.
Sorry, I can't.
I bet it could be in Africa. In Australia, I don't think so. It's in Cambodia, that one. It's from Vinci. It's what we call waste pickers. Waste pickers. Waste pickers is an informal economy of millions of people picking up our waste and trying to resell it. You have entire population living on those dumps with all the health consequences. And so, I mean, this is a consequence of our consumption. And now companies are trying to formalize that market, like Vinci, Unilever. They have programs where they want to help construct factories where they can recycle plastic better. And so that the waste pickers can earn a better living, and try to just formalize this economy so that those millions of people have, I won't say proper jobs, but a higher living wage.
If I'm not mistaken, last year we had a scandal in France about that. Yeah, about I think it was from a milk company. We were sending our bottle. Our trash to other countries, and they said stop refunds.
We are sending our trash to other countries.
Yeah, wasn't there a scandal last year?
I think other countries saying stop, but we are you know that Ghana is getting all the electronic waste.
Yeah.
There's another documentary on that called Welcome to Sodom.
Yes,
It's fascinating. Welcome to Sodom. Amazing images. But it's electronic, all our computers, phones, and you have all those kids and families, and you see these images of they're burning all the wires to get rid of the plastic to get the wires back. I mean, it's scary. I mean, we are dumping everything to developing countries. So how do we get there? Well, we need a revolution. Called the impact revolution or impact finance revolution. That's Sir Ronald Cohen, who coined the term, the impact revolution. First, let's, is that okay? The speed?
Yeah, just I wanted to check in with everyone to see if you have any questions up until this point. Don't hesitate if there's certain notions that you might not understand to ask the question. That's what Stephanie's here for as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't be shy.
And because we really went over the whole functioning of the financial system in 40 minutes or less, so that's really a lot to take in. When I teach my students, they're completely depressed.
Well, I can see why.
I'm like, oh my God, it's worse than we thought. And they really get, because you intuitively, you know, this is what's happening. How come bankers are paid so much? What are they doing? You know, it doesn't have a real tangible economic reality. Why are they paid so much more than teachers? That's because they make more money, they create more money, but they're using our savings from real jobs to do that. But yeah, it can be depressing, but you have to know the extent of the problem if we want to tackle it. And there is We have to anyway, so we don't really have a choice. So let's look at the needs. This is from Finance for Tomorrow, but the numbers are really correlate. 90, yeah, it's not very clear. $90 trillion is needed to as investment to achieve the ecological transition. 90 trillion. So I added next to it, that's 90,000 billion. Because it's hard to grasp the numbers. 90,000 billion is needed to address the ecological transition. 5,000 is needed to achieve the SDGs. 5,000 billion per year is needed. Per year is needed. 300 million that's just for the ocean that we need per year. And that's Finance for Tomorrow, but they're French. They said in France is the #1 issuer of green bonds. Okay, good. But it's still the market for green bonds has exploded, but it's still below 1 trillion. We are probably going to reach 1 trillion in 2022. It's really growing very fast, but still we need 90 trillion. The funding gap, and this is really why we need finance, the financial system, is that OECD government, they're already spending 10 trillion on health and education. That's double what they were spending in 1950, 60 years ago. And governments are really can't spend more. I mean, you've seen the debt, the slide on the debt, over 100% of public debt. So even though they're spending a lot, they don't really have much leeway to spend more, and it's still not enough. Philanthropic donations, they amount right now to about $150 billion a year. So it sounds like a lot, but again, it's still not enough. So where is the capital? It's in the financial system. In the financial system, we have over 250 trillion, so 250,000 billion of investable assets. That is in the financial system, and that has been used to finance virtual assets. So we need to get this money to go into the real economy. So at COP26, they were all there. All the banks, asset managers, they were all present. They all claimed together that they would address just transition and that they will dedicate their funds to the just transition. And they were representing over $130 trillion, those asset managers there. So that's their claim, but now let's see what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And another point about funding, yes?
But if they need to have the return on investment here, they're not just going to give the money. So what do they want? What comes from?
They want returns, and they don't want risk.
So what?
They don't want risk and they want returns.
Exactly. So
but that is the big question. If we have returns, the capital will flow, because then we are back to.
So what's the return for them here? Like,
well, that is the $90 trillion question.
Okay.
The planet.
That is the $90 trillion question.
But understand the monetizing.
Yeah.
How do you monetize the planet? His answer.
It's not about monetizing the planet. It's about looking at what it costs to have floods, wars. How much does it cost? Unemployed, homelessness. That's not free. That has costs. So because there are costs, you can find ways, because there are solutions, because those things cost money to society, to government, and even to companies. And that's why I have this little dot on businesses, that businesses have their part to play, because it's really through businesses that we have the biggest externalities. The impact on the environment is through businesses production, and then we buy their product, we consume. So businesses have a big role to play in there, to partner with financial institutions to de-risk investment. So this is really finance, not 101, 1.0, it's really 5.0. This is where we are, trying to look at what type of returns we can find for all of these actors so that they agree to tackle the issue. Yeah.
My understanding here is we need to work on business and government to make change, then capital will follow.
No, it has to happen at all levels, but governments alone can't do everything. And as you see, governments change every 5 years. Public debt, governments are pretty stretched. And if you look at what's going on right now, there is a crash in the bond market. Nobody sees it because as an individual, you don't buy bonds. If there was a crash in the stock market, everybody sees it because people have Apple stocks, Tesla stocks. I mean, you understand that. Whereas the bond, I mean, you don't own a bond. So there is a crash in the bond market right now. The bond market has, because long-term interest rates are going back up. They were negative for years. So France, Germany were borrowing at negative rates. So it's open bar. And now France long-term interest rate is 1%. So it's still very low, but still you go from negative to 1% on 120% debt to GDP for France. And Germany is 0.5%. Again, still low, but they're coming from negative. And we have inflation. So if you want to lower inflation, I mean, you raise interest rates, but governments are stuck because if they raise interest rates, they are the ones who are indebted the most. So they're really, c'est Shahid Desilla. They don't know what to do. And levels of debt are higher now than they were just after the financial crisis.
Can you just explain really quickly
Huh?
what a bond is? I'm not sure if everyone knows what a bond is exactly.
Well, that's when we looked at the global savings market, capital markets, you have two big categories. One is bond, debt, and debt can be through loans, bonds, credit, that's all debt. And you have equity, listed equity or private equity. This is, and then you have hybrid products, but these are really the two big families. You can take equity or you can take a debt. Who are the actors? And this is what you mentioned. The actors of the impact revolution: government, public administration, coalitions, so that the United Nations, the EU, OECD, G7, coalition like B4IG, Global Steering Group on Impact Investing, the European Venture Philanthropy, EVPA. These are actors. The ones in blue are the ones who could be potentially impact investors. You have regulators like and accounting standards, academia, research, they are also actors. The G20 has something called the Financial Stability Board. You've heard of the TCFD? No? Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure. And this follows from the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol, 1997, governments gathered to address climate change, and nothing happened at that time. They created a carbon market instead. That became again an abstraction. So instead of reducing carbon emission, they created all those carbon credits and they created a market. So countries and companies exchange carbons instead of actually reducing. But that's typical behavior of the financial system. Instead of just taxing at the source, which would have been much simpler, but then you had veto from every country. Then you had that carbon disclosure, I can't remember the name of it, but now you have something called the TCFD trying to address that. They're trying to force companies to report on their carbon emission. So that has been approved at the EU level, and a few other countries, Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand. But sorry?
When was this approved? The last one?
The EU has, that's Fatme, would know, when TCFD is recent, it's happening like now.
Green taxonomy was approved last year.
So it's really happening now, but the US still not. And the US is the biggest polluter. And I'm not even talking about China. The US still has not approved. It's being discussed right now at the SEC to force companies to report. And it's still under discussion. It's been 10 years they've been trying to get the SEC, so the Securities Exchange Commission, the US, to force companies to report on their carbon emission, and they still have not managed. But even if they do, it still won't solve everything, because it would only report what companies are producing, but not what is happening in the supply chain, in the whole production chain. So it's still like the tip of the iceberg. But you have a lot of people working on it, and you have also accounting standards. At COP26, you have the big four accounting companies, KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, Deloitte, and Ernst & Young, who said that they would work toward how can companies report on their ESG in the accounts. So again, that was a claim. It's still not, they're working on it, but it's still not there.
ESG is environment, social, and governance.
Environmental, social, and governance, ESG, there are criteria. They are non-financial criteria. So what you call non-financial criteria, ESG. Another actor is philanthropy, and that is a big, they have a big role, foundations, in also financing the economy, the sustainability economy.
How
And
big? It
huh?
is really big. It's like how many percent of like investment is by?
At the moment, foundations are dedicating $150 billion every year to address the SDGs. It sounds like a lot, but it's not enough. And it's mostly US foundations, Ford, Gates, Omidyar. Omidyar is one of the biggest foundations, and it's a founder of eBay. And a lot of those foundations, the Heron Foundation, HERON, dedicate 100% of its endowment to impact investing. Ford dedicates 10%. The US changed the regulation in 2016. So that's where you see all the relationship between administration and impact. The US before foundation could give 5% of their endowment, their capital, to charities, and 95% had to be invested in the market. So foundations were actually more like hedge funds. So they could give 5% to charities in Amazonia against deforestation. That's 5%, and then the 95% are investing in Shell, BP, Total, you know. So that was the state of foundation, traditional ones. And now they changed the rules saying that the 95% can be invested in social businesses, in impact investing. So they unleashed, and they said that the trustees of the foundations also have a role to make sure that foundations contribute to the social economy. So you have actors like the Heron Foundation. The CEO is very outspoken woman, Clara Miller, who used to say that foundations are more like hedge funds, and she changed the foundation structure so that 100% of their endowment goes into social impact. 5% through charity and 95% through investment. And but that's really and she's leading the way. And you have other foundations like the Omidyar, like Gates. They have set up investment companies. They have set up investment funds to invest in very early stage companies, social businesses. So do you have that development at the level of foundations? The role of businesses is key because they are the ones who are creating all those externalities, pollutions, but they are also the ones who would benefit from the impact, from the resilience of a supply chain. They would benefit from that. They would benefit from better educated population they could hire. So they benefit from the impact. So they should pay their share. Where you have entrepreneurs, SME startups that are delivering the impact. And you have financial institutions where the capital is, and then you have private individuals. So all you, me, everybody who can participate to that impact revolution. So I won't spend a lot of time on that, but public administration, they have been doing things. Like at the United Nations level, you have the Green Bank, the Green Climate Fund that was set up. The EU, through the European Investment Bank, the European Investment Fund, they are dedicating over a third of their new funding to the climate transition. So that's what they said, at least a third, but they're doing, I think, more like 50%. They have set up something called Invest EU, which is a guarantee of about 40 billion euros that the European Investment Fund is bringing to attract 700 billion of private capital into sustainable infrastructures. So they are doing things at the EU level. The US also is starting later, but once they start, they get bigger. They have launched a Clean Energy Sustainable Accelerator, where the public is putting $100 billion in that accelerator for ecological transition, so that they can attract 500 billion of private funding. So that's part of the de-risking. So the public brings what we call catalytic capital, concessional capital. It's a kind of guarantee to attract private capital. In France, where we have the loi Pacte, we have the 90-10. Comment on appelle ça en français? You know, the PER là. So pension plan in companies of over, I don't know, 500 people, you have to invest 10% in social businesses. There's a name in French, but the Anglo-Saxon call it the 90-10. And a lot of countries are looking at it and want to implement the same thing. The UK is looking at it. And then the OECD, you have coalitions like the 4AG one. So you do have things going on at the public level. It's not, at the regulatory level, there are also things going on in terms of auditing. I won't spend time on this. Why do we need finance? Well, if you want to scale up impact, we need funding. That's really the short answer. And funding, whether it's grant money, whether it's public loan, private investment, this is all funding. It's not gifted, it's all funding. To scale up, we need funding. This is, oh, we can't read it. The life cycle of a normal business. You need money at the beginning, then you have negative cash flow called the valley of death, which is really, really difficult part where you're trying to get money from angel investor, from the love money, family and friends, from the very early stage venture capital, then from the venture capital, then from the bigger private equity. And at the end, when you're successful and finally you break even, you can maybe look at becoming public and IPO, and that's like a jackpot. But so more specifically, why do we need sustainable finance and impact investors? Again, let's look at companies. Now the social business companies, you have different types. You have ones that have revenues, but they don't cover the cost. So that would be the one on the left. And then you have ones that are barely breaking even. And traditionally for those companies, and we're talking about companies, not NGOs. Traditionally, those companies, they could not get funding, investment. So they were really funded by grants. And then when they have a bit more revenues and a small profit, and then when they have really market profits, then they can tackle the financial market. But this is really what we're looking at, is like traditional investment don't work for those companies that have revenues, but not enough to cover the cost, but they have big social impact. And this is why we need finance, and we need sustainable finance and a different type of financing. And sustainable finance, in one sentence, what it means is finance that integrates non-financial elements, the ESG elements. That's what is sustainable finance, that we look at non-financial elements.
How financing the company in this situation can actually change the equation. If they lose money, then we take non-financial impact in the equation, however they will lose. I cannot see the sustainable part of this financing.
Well, that's like most investors can't see the sustainable part of that financing. That's why you need new instruments that put a monetary value on the social impact. You need to monetize the impact, and that's why impact measurement, impact assessment is so important. Is that the new, what we call impact finance, is that without the assessment, the measurement of the impact, that monetization, it will be very hard to unlock capital.
Like government create kind of cost or tax for a specific kind of social impact, and then this additional cost change the equation. That makes sense more here, because they could have less tax on carbon or social issue, whatever.
Yeah, but we will get there. It's just that you need new types of instruments that integrate those carbon credits, for instance.
We need to find a way to change the equation.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, there are no instruments right now.
Sorry?
There are no instruments right now.
There are.
There are.
Yes, there are.
To measure, exactly, to measure impact.
There are new financial instruments that exist. That they've been existing for 10 years. That's what Monica did. Yes.
So,
but we need to get them mainstream. It's difficult because you need to measure impact. And you need to have actors who understand that it is profitable for them in dollar terms.
so the measurement exists, it's just their utilization is not being taken by the financial
Utilization
institutions.
could be happening for now is by turning to cost of government. Avoiding cost.
Yeah, but for
So
homeless
for
people.
avoided the cost, these
You
additional
avoid costs, but
that's
you also
creating
have
innovation.
several things. When you have unemployed people, it costs allocation chômage. There's a cost to the government, but there's also revenue when you get those people back to work through skilling and training, because then they will spend and they will pay taxes. So there is revenue as well. So there is a profit on these social impacts.
It's so clear that it's a revenue to the society as a whole. But I'm thinking how you change the calculation of individual investors, which not necessarily think about the whole society interest. So like
That's why when you can think about companies for them, if companies have producers, smallholder farmers in Africa working on the supply chain to pick up whether it's coffee or anything, well, let's say L'Oreal, they have this program where they're picking up shea butter grain, and they're providing insurance for climate and health insurance to the women, because mostly women picking up the shea butter grains. And so L'Oreal right now, they are doing it as philanthropy. So they are paying this insurance to their producers. But actually, that's what we're trying to do and that coalition, to show them that it is profitable for them to do that, because it will make their supply chain stronger production. So in terms of procurement costs, it will lower their procurement costs because there would be no interruption of their supply chain. There's also gain to be made in terms of sales, because if you explain how this product is being sourced in an inclusive way, you may increase your sales of that product. So this is things to take into account, but let's not jump over. Going back to the valley of death, or the death valley. So you have really the life cycle, the investments, different investment stages. When you're really early stage and the seed stage, it's difficult to get any investor. That's why you have grant money. It can be from foundation, government, and then you grow, but you're still at the expansion stage. So your cash flow probably still not positive. And that's where you can try to tackle funds that invest for impact. And there are more and more of them, but still very little. So they can be corporate. I mean, there could be funds from corporation. They can be funds attached to foundation. We see that there are more of them are creating investment funds, like the Gates, like Omidyar. And then once they grow, they can really tackle private equity funds. I mean, funds that invest with impact. So it's that differentiation between investing for impact, investing with impact. But you will have all this presentation. Let's look at the type of different investment funds that exist, impact investor funds. You have the foundations that we talked about. You have the impact accelerators. And this is what Make Sense has built. Make Sense launched a fund in 2019 with 8.5 million euros. And now they are launching the second one with 80 million euros. They are accelerator funds. And this is what Singa is trying to do. So these are investment funds that are attached to incubators. So you can have all kinds of incubators, but Make Sense, Singa are incubators for social businesses, addressing social issues. Then you have corporate impact funds, whether it's L'Oreal, Schneider, Danone, they all have impact funds. And you have the impact funds, which are in the financial systems, which are the ones that have the most money. So this is really, I would say, it's very summarized, of course, a simplified overview of the possible impact funds. And more corporations are launching impact funds. In terms of the mechanisms, so here I use impact finance, sustainable finance indifferently, because let's simplify. So again, in sustainable finance, in sustainable finance, you have two types of instruments, what I call the traditional ones and what I call the impact. This is not textbook, it's my vocabulary. So in funding, when you are looking for funding, you have two types of funding, debt or equity. So either you borrow from the bank or you open your capital to external investors, equity. And when you go bigger, you go public equity. So in traditional instruments, you have those that are liquid, the big ones, the ones that are traded. So here you have heard of green bonds, social bonds, equity of companies that have a good ESG rating, like Danone, Unilever. So you have funds that invest in those big companies with a good ESG rating, and they call themselves, they say they do impact investing, but they're really investing in big, large companies that are listed on the market. So in terms of really the impact on the ground, it's pretty little. The green bond market has exploded. We're going to reach 1 trillion this year. It was 700 billion last year. 5 years ago, it was less than 100 billion. So it's growing quite fast. And you have the non-liquid market, which is a private equity or private debt market that invests in sustainable companies or projects, but they usually invest in medium-sized, larger-sized companies, private companies. But they don't tackle the really early stage, the social businesses, the ones that are incubated here. They're not going to interest those actors. They'll say, come back in 2 years. And then you have impact instruments. And I put the impact accelerators in there, but because I didn't know where to put them. So here it's funding mostly in equity. And that would be the Singa fund. That's what Make Sense has done. This is what Inco Venture would be in those in this category. They are really investment funds that are, I would say, adossés, that are linked to an incubator that is incubating companies that are trying to do social good. And I assume, I hope, and this is what that's what they were created for, is that they invest in companies that can demonstrate that are really addressing a social issue and that they really are achieving what they said they were going to do. Then you have another category of instruments that are also rather large, but they are targeting the impact, called sustainability-linked bonds or sustainability-linked loans, SLL, SLBs. And these are products, they're like bonds or loans. The difference is that the interest rate that you pay on your debt varies depending on the indicators achieved. So when those companies, Danone has one, NL has one, I mean, they are like 1 billion loans. NL has a 1 billion SLL, Danone has a 2 billion SLB, I think. So they pay an interest rate, let's say 4% or 5%. And if they achieve some indicators, they are environmental indicators, then the banks agree to lower the interest rate, maybe by 0.5%, so 3.5. And you can have ceilings like that. See, if they achieve another level of impact, then you can pay less interest. So this is the sustainability-linked instruments. And the third part, which is the more interesting one, because it's also the more complicated one, is what we call outcome-based mechanisms. Other names for them: pay for result, result-based financing. This is all outcome-based finance. The most known ones are social impact bonds, development impact bonds. In French, it's contrat impact social. And these are really mechanisms that directly target and remunerate the impact directly. And that's where you will see that there is a return that you have to, for the investor. So the big difference would say that impact instruments, the return is really linked to the measurement of the impact. It's linked to the impact and it's linked to the measurement of the impact. So we're just going to look, yes.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Can you check if also video?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
My question was the instrument that you listed that are in the allocation part of the capital. Do you see potential where we create the money, like cryptocurrency? That's kind of the way that we create the money and then allocate in this way. Do you see potential there?
I don't understand the question.
Like, I see two ways. We create the money like the bank do, and then we decide how to allocate. The instrumentation that I see is that how we can change the allocation dynamic. My question is, do you see any potential in the creation part?
I actually have exactly the same question. This is a topic we've been talking with Ramsey for a long time. It's how we create the value today, or the money. Maybe we could say every time someone finds housing, every time a refugee finds housing, every time a refugee finds a job through a social company or something like that, it generates cash, generates crypto or another kind of currency that we don't actually have today, that would actually monetize the impact and see where it's allocated, whether it's allocated to the refugee that actually also finds a place, to the social company that found a spot for that person, and to eventually the financial investor, and then see how this currency could be used in markets. Today, it's almost impossible because the only currencies we know, like Bitcoin systems, that they're not used. But maybe tomorrow, like crypto that you would generate thanks to social relationships, social impact, could make you wealthier, and you would have like a portfolio of cryptos and a portfolio of your
I'm not covering the crypto market. I think to me it's more an allocation issue than a creation issue, because when you say when we have a positive impact and we create money like crypto, who decide on the value of those? Honestly, I've got a really hard time with cryptocurrencies because I don't know what it's backed on. I don't know how do you decide on the value of something? If everybody wants it, then it has value. But then suddenly, it's like NFTs, you know, when you have this NFT art of an emoji being sold for millions of dollars. I mean, honestly, I don't understand. So I'm not going to participate in that market. I've never bought cryptocurrency because I don't understand how they're valued.
No, but so you can, what we're saying also is we can decide.
Can you speak a little bit louder?
But the thing is that today, it's not a problem of creation. It's a problem of allocation. The money is there. That's the whole thing, is that why do we need, you know, it's like the money is there. There is enough money in the system to tackle. There's enough money in the system to end poverty, to end hunger. There is enough.
Yeah, just allocation.
Yeah, but just on the subject, it seems like we can reach this money. So could this crypto money be a tool to reach it, to have access to this pool of money that become rich right now? Could it be a tool?
It could be, but the key is to unlock that capital that exists. I think this is really what we have. Why trying to find other solution? Not other solution, but I'm not competent for cryptocurrencies. But what I know is that in the financial system we do have the money. There's over $250 trillion of investable assets. I'm not talking about value that exists, of investable assets. It's there. So really what we are looking at today is how do you get that money to go into
the accessing the money.
How do you access it? How do you unlock it? So that's why we need to look at how we access it instead of creating a new one.
Yeah, you cannot create something that you just give a value from it. Exactly what you thought. It doesn't really exist. But at the same time,
But the value exists, it's just not recognized.
But
the value, for instance, of what we do at Singa, it's huge. I see it every day, it changes lives.
Yeah.
But nobody's paying for that.
No.
Actually, the money we get, usually we get it for something else. And so this is where I feel like there is actually space for the monetization of a lot of the things we do that are not recognized by the market. And what I'm trying to do with the fund, and we'll talk about this later with everyone, is to actually access like the big pocket of money that already exists.
Exactly.
But I have this feeling that it's so hard to get there because there is only a few people that are actually managing this right now, and they really don't want to share that pocket. And so maybe if we create a second way to generate the value, maybe they will start to also be like, oh shit, we need to change the way we allocate it.
It's like speaking the same
Maybe,
language.
but in the end, the problem is still the same, is that how do you show that this has value? It's really the monetization of what you're doing. And this is what outcome-based mechanisms are for.
Okay.
I think that the dimensions, it's coming back to what I spoke at the beginning, is there is no any standardization for the monetization of the return on investment.
There's no
here.
standardization of the
And,
return.
and that's the issue, because if there would be some kind of standardization that's saying, yes, if an unemployed person, whatever, cost that, and then in return, this is what happened, and we have it. So then they know that because banks, at the end of the day, it's something innovative.
It is, we are on our way this is what we're trying to do, to standardize it. Because at the moment, it does not happen. You have outcome-based mechanisms. You have hundreds of them, which is still not many, that exist in the world. The first one was created in 2010. So it's over 11 years old.
This way I see to only government, means you impose some standard and you
Yes.
But do you know that the government doesn't work without the bank, and the bank doesn't work without the government? They're together, they're up. So I don't think that I think it's a true PPP, public-private partnership here.
Yeah, blended
all
finance.
Those players needs to work in the same, in the equal level, because government change every 4 years.
It's really blended finance. So this is how the government can. So in outcome-based mechanism, maybe through an example, the first one was created in 2010 by Sir Ronald Cohen, who was the founder of Apex. So the asset manager, the private equity.
Yeah.
And the deal was that they made a deal with the government saying that investors, and at the time, in 2010, the investors were the foundation. Today, the investors will be real investors. The investors will invest £5 million, so it was small, £5 million. This money will go to NGOs, that could be social businesses, delivering the impact. And the objective was to reduce the rate of recidivism in jails. They're trying to do the same thing in France, by the way. So, because what they realize is that when a prisoner gets out of jail, within 18 months, they're back in jail. And this has a cost to society and to the government. So they said, okay, we're going to put £5 million to NGOs that are going to accompany the prisoners to integrate them in society. So it could be refugees, to integrate refugees. And let's see, and the government, you agree that if we lower the recidivism rate by 7%, you pay 5 million back to the investors. If we lower the recidivism rate by more, you pay more, and then there's a return. So it was a contract that lasted, I think, 5 years. So after 5 years, they managed to reduce the recidivism rate by 9 or 10%. So in the end, the return on investment to investors were about 3%, 3.5%, like a bond. And they call that social impact bond, often it's not a bond. This is an example. So refugees, same thing. You can say, all right, we have social businesses.
That's actually what we do with Jacket. We prepared a social impact bond.
Yeah.
Because welcoming refugees with local citizens makes integration pass from like 10 years to 3 years.
Yeah.
So it has like, you avoid a lot of costs, and so we found they have actually never signed that social impact bond. but they're basically asking us to do it now because
But then
No,
they're going to
but-
sign it now?
So
no, they're going to sign something else.
this is taking a long time to become mainstream. And it still has not become mainstream, but you have hundreds in the UK, hundreds in the US. You have, and France has
Yeah.
launched 3 outcome funds. Outcome funds, so the outcome funder
For this.
to pay for that. So France is a bit slow on that to pick up, but it's picking up. And traditionally, the outcome payer, so the one that agrees to pay back the investor, has been the government or development agencies. And traditionally, the investors have been foundations, except that now, fast forwarding today, what I'm saying today is that it doesn't have to be the government, the only outcome funder. Corporations should take part in the outcome funding. Corporate foundations, corporate impact funds, I don't really care which budget of the corporation, but corporations should be taking part of the outcome payers because corporations are the one benefiting. So what we're seeing, there are maybe like 3 in the world now, is that it's investment funds that are investing just in social impact bonds, development impact bonds, and we are seeing outcome funds starting up. And the biggest outcome fund today is called the Education Outcome Fund, investing in education for girls, a lot for girls in Africa. And the Education Outcome Fund is on its way to reach $1 billion. I mean, their target is $1 billion, and they have already raised $500 million. And the outcome payers in the Education Outcome Fund is mostly development agencies, governments. It's still public. But the next stage would be to get private investors into the outcome funders and get private investors in the investors' pocket. But for that, we need to be able to monetize the impact.
Stephanie, I have a question, and I know that this question often comes up, but like for instance, when we're talking about like the prison situation where private investors are investing in prisoners not returning or former prisoners not returning to prison, I imagine that you have to put in place like a certain mechanisms and indicators to make sure to prove that, right?
Yeah.
And so today, like, I mean, how can we avoid a situation where, because I think today key performance indicators puts a lot of pressure to succeed in certain things. And how can we avoid a situation where we're not putting pressure on people to create an impact that is not a real impact, or it's just, it comes off as an impact, but it's actually can be negative for society. I don't know if that's clear.
No, it's not 100% clear, but when you are setting up a social business, you're being incubating at Singa, is that you're addressing an issue, aren't you?
Yeah.
So if you're addressing, and that's really part of the whole impact measurement, impact assessment subject, and maybe you can fast forward to that, is that, well, no, let me go back. In those funding, in outcome-based funding, you need the funder, the investor that is pre-financing the impact. You need the outcome payer, government, corporation, who agree to remunerate the impact once it's achieved. And you need the delivery organization, social business, NGO to deliver the impact. And you need to be able to assess. So an independent assessment, you have to be able to assess the impact. But when you set up a mechanism like that, you decide what you're targeting. It's not general impact. You are addressing an issue. How many girls are going to be going to school?
Okay.
So you know what you're going to try to measure. So prisoners, it's really the recidivism rate. How many prisoners go back to prison? So it's very concrete. So you need
Impact assessment service.
So you need to know beforehand what you are financing. You're not just financing impact, you're financing a very precise subject. A refugee, housing. How many refugees get housing? How many refugees get jobs? So it's precise. It's not going to be the same instrument for job and housing.
So like, for example, if right now we would like to change our KPIs, because that's the issue we have right now. We have funders, private ones mostly, that are driving those indicators. How can we, as an NGO, set up new definition? Or I don't know, you said how can we try to monetize,
Monetize, yeah.
monetize our impacts and tell them that's the impact we should evaluate right now, not the one you want us to reach.
The monetization of impact, you have lots of research centers on it. Harvard Business School, HEC, ESSEC, all the academia, you have networks like the GENE network, you have the IMP, Impact Management Project. So they're all trying to give some methodologies and helping you. And then you have organizations, governmental ones, that are also working on that. I don't know the relationship you can have, but for instance, in England, you have the unit cost database. I mentioned it already. The unit cost database is open access. The unit cost database has about 800 indicators, social indicators, and it has a monetary value. And that's why they managed to create. Yeah. The unit cost database, they know how much a homeless person costs to society. And I think they have different categories, whether it's man, woman, depending. Same for unemployed, whether it's a man, woman, young people, they know the cost. But in France, we have those data as well. It's just not available. In France, they know how much an unemployed person costs.
Yeah, but we just have to have it mainstream right now, because it's always about.
Yeah, but you have to start somewhere. Every march starts with the first step. But in France, we know how much unemployment costs.
Let me
So-
check how much was
So why we need that impact assessment is for transparency, so that's efficient. I'm talking finance, so that we have transparency about financial instruments, that they're efficient because they know what we're measuring, so that we can calculate the true returns. Again, because when you're investing in an oil company, Total, and they're making zillions of profit, by the way. But we just saw the CAC 40 profit is the highest ever.
Yeah, I know. Here, I know.
They are making profit so much from the raise of oil prices. Yeah, but so you would think, oh my God, Total is a great investment. It's a great company. It's making lots of money. But if Total and Shell and all those people had to pay part of the $90 trillion that we need for the ecological transition, they would be much less profitable, and their stock price would be much lower. But that is the whole thing about calculating true returns, and that's why you need to monetize that impact, whether it's positive or negative, because their impact on the environment, -1, is worth trillions of dollars every
But
year.
not in cash.
But that's
Sorry.
But not in cash. This not in the
Yeah,
cost structure.
it's worth something in the value of the
For the
company.
society.
But that was the discussion apparently in Scotland the last time.
Yeah, but
But they
that's
lobbied so hard on this.
of
They
course,
could
but
not
this
pass it,
is
But that was something that they really tried to do.
but this is what Ronnie Cohen is pushing for. It's
Yeah.
what we call the impact weighted accounts. You have to integrate those elements into your account in dollar terms, so that we see that it's like provisions, or it has to impact your accounts, and those companies would not be profitable, or they would not be as profitable, and suddenly we would see the true return of those companies. So the measurement of the impact is really about transparency, efficiency of the tool, and minimizing your risk so that you're aware of what's going on in those companies, and you need all that to unlock funding. And then the other slides are impact assessment. Input, output, outcome, impact. Are you?
I think it's worth going through, actually.
Sorry, it's
I'm
out
sorry,
of focus.
Unfortunately, I need to
Go.
leave. I would like, do you have any source that we can take a look at after? Or?
There's a video, we're filming it,
Okay.
and so we'll.
Well, do you have the
video.
presentation?
Yeah,
An additional reading material, I don't know. if it's
Books
possible.
and-
Yeah. I'm really interested.
Additional reading. There's so much. I mean, this is such a moving subject. You have so much going on. Most companies, when they think about impact, or most people, government, they really think in terms of input. Input, if we talk about training, whether it's for refugees or homeless or young people, they think about how many but the input is the resources you put in. So you're going to hire teachers, you're going to hire mentors. So it's really the input is the money it costs you, the resources you put in. And most companies are really reporting on that. Some are a bit more advanced and they report on the output. So the output, what would it be? For instance, it would be how many hours that were spent on the teachers, on teaching, on training, or how many trainers they hired. So that would be the output. The outcome would be how many, it's concrete change. So how many people actually got a job? That's the outcome. So you have to decide at the beginning, why are you doing training? We're not, because some companies don't even think why they're doing training. They do training because they're ticking the box. They are doing ESG, so they want to do something social, so they are going to give training to vulnerable people. Okay, great, but they don't really think about why. So they are going to say, oh, we gave so many hours of training, we hired that many teachers, so that's an output. But what is more important is the outcome. How many of those homeless, vulnerable young people got a job? That's what is important. So that's the outcome. That's what we call outcome-based contract. Outcome, what's the outcome? But then what we call the impact, it's, I would say, one step further, is that as a result of all those young people, vulnerable people getting a job, it's the increase of livelihood, well-being for society. It's really the impact on society. When you think about impact on society, what does it bring to society to have refugees, vulnerable people, homeless, integrated in the workplaces? And that is the impact.
But then if I'm an investor, just telling me that there is bringing livelihood into whatever, it doesn't translate.
No, that's why we're talking about outcome-based mechanism and not so much impact. We all want to know if you have young people, vulnerable people being integrated in the workforce, what is the return? Because that has a return, because they are producing something, they're going to pay taxes.
Exactly.
They are going to consume, etc. That you can monetize, because you know how much it costs society to have unemployed, homeless. There is cost to that. So you can, that's why we're looking at the outcome for those outcome-based mechanisms.
So the impact is the nice to have?
Impact on society is
the nice to have.
It's at the government level that you can maybe think about what, at the end, your population is better educated. But for investors, for the mechanism, we have to look at the outcome. But really, right now, when we talk about impact measurement, they're still at the output level. Are they input or output? And then there are examples. So we went, well, why we need impact assessment to unlock funding, how we're doing it by input, output, outcome, different examples, the explanation of what these all are, and then what you do. How do you really go through that process when you're a project and that you have to measure your impact? Well, you have to go through a process that we call the theory of change. But you have that, I think, in incubator. Yeah, so you have to define the problem and then take the steps. That's all.
Really
and then I went to work.
Yeah, it was excellent.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll skip the last part because it's.
Questions. People,
yes,
yes.
here for questions.
So if you guys have any questions, now is the time. We would really, really love to know. Well, first of all, if you have any questions on the content, and also just your feedback in general about the session. Do you find these sessions useful? Would you like to see more of these types of sessions? So
the last ones are for fun. Sorry. Just want to look cooperation.
So yeah. So the floor is yours. Maybe we can stop the presentation. Yeah.
Right.
Don't be shy.
No, it's not in the subject, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
So you have all this, yeah.
No, it's more like they can't hear us.
They can hear us.
Any question?
No.
Unmute yourself.
Maybe not questions, but what maybe feelings about how we can use all the things we saw together on a daily basis to negotiate with our partners, to rebrand maybe our activities.
Well, the thing about creating an investment fund, an impact fund, is a logical continuation of what you've been doing. Because if you incubate all those companies and you have great projects and they can't find funding, you can't scale up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really the basic thing. Why we need finance? We need finance from scale up impact, we need finance. You need funding. So how do you get funding? All right, you can go grants, you can get the subsidies, you can try to get all you can, but you still the level of public debt. Honestly, there's no more money to fund, governments don't have money. The money is in the financial market. And there are tons of it. So how do you unlock it? And it really makes sense to set up a fund. Now, how you set it up, what your criteria, how you measure, what type of company you invest. I mean, this is all something to define as you go along. A lot of the subjects you're dealing with, they are candidates for outcome-based financing, because this is not straight plain vanilla financing, because the return is linked to social outcome that need to be funded, that need to be monetized. And you will hear tons of people telling you, that it's too complicated, we can't monetize social, It's not true. The UK, they managed to do it. And the UK is probably the most advanced market in terms of outcome-based mechanism and monetization of impact, because they don't have a social system. That they had to do it themselves. Yeah. So no, it's the private company that took care of trying to develop social programs, because the government's not doing it.
Yeah.
And there is a great, if you want, you can look at Pret à manger.
Yeah.
Pret, we had they are in the coalition of B4IG, and yesterday we had the CEO who spoke at the launch of the incubator, because we are launching 10 new projects in the incubator. And I mean, I've known about that program. They have a program called Rising Stars that they created in 2008. It's to integrate homeless people. So it's based in the UK. And so it's a UK program, but they started testing it in France.
Yes, I know trainer organization.
There's one location in France where they first started. There are 600 Pret à manger in the world, in 7 countries, I think. And it's mostly UK, and they have managed to integrate over 550, almost 600 homeless in their workforce. And what they're doing in parallel is that, of course, they train them to work, but they train them on other skills, and they also help them to find housing. So they partner with the Social Housing Institute in the UK to find housing. And what's really interesting about Pret is that they are doing it out of the foundation, but for them, in terms of business, it's a way of recruiting.
Yeah.
And especially in that industry, it's hard to recruit. You see, in America, nobody wants to work in restaurant, hospitality. Nobody wants to work. So for them, it transformed the way they recruit. It has been transforming the way they're recruiting. And what if Pret can do, and he said it was relatively simple to do, if Pret, which is a relatively small company, can do it, I mean, everybody can do it.
So yeah, we have to.
So really the question about cooperation that we're asking them is that it's great to have all those training programs, but how many people do you actually hire?
Yeah.
Because that's a question I don't really know how to answer, because they're still on their input output thinking. They talk about, they say they have their training, they have mentorship, they have all this, but how many people actually get a job, and how many people actually you hired? So that is a real question. Capgemini has a program called the Digital Academy, and they hire 10%. So, but they have it in different countries, in South America, everywhere, in France, barely. It's quite successful. They completely exceeded their target, and they hire 10% of the people they train, and they train them in digital skills that are in demand. So you do have lots of examples that exist that companies are doing and that you can benefit from, collaborate.
So there is two steps. We have to define and monetize the impact, the work we're doing, but we also have to do trainings for those companies, for them to see the outcome, what can they gain from investing in impact issues.
Yes, but you can't do it on your own. You have to find the people. They're all trying to do it. Everybody's trying to do the same.
But they don't know how.
No, they don't know
I would
how.
like to
But,
think that it's mostly the how. But still, a question for them? Because a lot of companies may write, this morning I received an email saying I can hire a lot of people. But how? They need to speak French. They need to have these skills. But how can they reach this stage of offering jobs to connecting on investing as well
So
in
those-
this circle?
those companies that ask them to speak French and they have to have those skills, are they providing language training?
No.
But that's
And that's why I
That's
was
something
thinking
they have
about
to do.
trainings too, to tell them that that's not only about being available, it's also about giving them space to learn,
Yeah.
time to learn as well, for them to be useful. I
No,
have to
but
tell
so
them, I use those little
Yeah.
Quotations.
Thank you.
But these need to be integrated in a company. You do have companies, Capgemini is one example, that have those training programs, hiring programs in-house. But if you don't do it in-house, then do partnerships. I don't know. And that's what we're trying to do at B4AG, is trying to get the companies to share their program. Very hard, very hard. They all are happy to present.
Yeah.
They're all happy to
Right.
share their program. But ask them collectively to build something, very hard. So, yeah, anyway.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much.
Yeah, this was really interesting.
I don't know, Peter, how many people are left?
I think we just have Peter and Tina.
But they all wrote in the chat, have to go, thank you.
Yeah.
Lunchtime.
But
Huh?
at least we can just say, to Peter and Tina, I don't know if you're still here, guys. We see blank windows, but anyway, I'll try. So we'll continue
The
the
German and
conversation
Swiss is
on the 4th of April. So you're more than welcome, and we'll share anyway this information. And we'll be talking about what Singa can actually do in this field and sector now that we know a bit more. And one thing that was really cool in your presentation is to see that we are actually actively already looking for taking steps and looking for financial solutions, because we've been working really hard on a social impact bond for our hosting program, and we're working really hard to actually build an impact fund. So I feel like we are on the right path. So that's also
Yeah.
what I.
And
Well, I
last
get from
night,
what you
we
said.
talked about those KPIs that you're talking about. It came
You
up
are
in
on the right track. What you need is to embark people.
So
Because it's
Peter, I
good
see
to-
you're still here.
you need to
See
embark
you in
people.
the course as well.
Thank you.
Yes.
When we met the first time, the big envelope that would be sent to me by the banks and financial institutions. We just need to access them.
Maybe we can say bye to
Yeah.
Peter.
Goodbye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.
So if I don't want to have a question, to stop the recording.
Then we